If the Brain Was an App podcast, episode 9, Emotion is Not the Enemy. Hello, and welcome to If the Brain Was an App, the expanded interface, a This Place Called Earth series exploring perception, programming, and the hidden architecture of the human mind. In the last episode, we explored memory as reconstruction. We looked at how memory is not a perfect recording of the past, but a living process shaped by emotion, identity, repetition, bodily state, language, and the meaning you attach to what happened. We looked at how memory can become self-consistent before it becomes truth-consistent, and how the stories you tell about the past can quietly shape who you believe you are allowed to become. The system you were told to distrust in this episode, we move into emotion. And this matters because emotion is often treated as the thing that gets in the way, the distortion, the weakness, the irrational force that must be controlled, suppressed, managed, or overcome so that logic can finally do its job. Something has been threatened, desired, remembered, anticipated, protected, or revealed. Emotion is often the first interpreter. Before conscious thought has fully arrived, emotion has already begun assigning importance, safe or unsafe, welcome or threatening, close or distant, fair or unfair, familiar or unfamiliar, valuable or meaningless, worth moving towards or worth moving away from. The mind may later build language around that response, but the emotional system is already shaping the field. You do not experience reality as neutral data and then decide how to feel about it afterwards. More often, the state arrives first. The body responds. Emotion colors the interface. Then the thought begins to explain what the system has already started to feel. This connects directly to everything we have explored so far. In episode 3, we saw that perception is constructed, not received. In episode 4, we saw that the brain predicts before it perceives. In episode 5, we looked at how labels divide complexity into simplified categories. In episode 6, we moved beyond the story into electrical, chemical, rhythmic, and nervous system signals. In episode 7, we explored how reward loops can train desire and relief-seeking. In episode 8, we saw how memory reconstructs the past and builds identity from remembered meaning. Now, in episode 9, we look at the emotional layer that runs through all of it. Because perception is never only visual, prediction is never only cognitive, memory is never only factual, identity is never only conceptual, behavior is never only logical, emotion is woven through the entire interface, yet we are often taught to distrust it. That teaching creates a deep split inside the human system. The so-called rational part tries to dominate the emotional part. The mind tries to win against the body. Logic tries to distance itself from feeling. People begin speaking as if emotion is something beneath them, as if intelligence means being unaffected, detached, cold, precise, and untouchable. But this often creates another kind of distortion. It becomes defensiveness. It becomes a projection. It becomes the force that guides thought while thought believes it is independent. That is why emotional awareness is not the opposite of intelligence. It is part of intelligence. If you do not know what you are feeling, you may not know what is shaping your interpretation. If you do not know what emotion has been activated, you may mistake your first perception for reality. If you do not know what your body is defending, you may call your defense truth. If you do not know what fear is filtering, you may call fear discernment. If you do not know what shame is protecting, you may call shame reason. If you do not know what desire is pulling you towards, you may call desire choice. This is where manipulation becomes possible. Because if emotion guides attention, meaning perception and behavior, then anyone who can influence emotion can influence thought before thought believes it has been influenced. You do not need to control what people think directly if you can control what they feel first. Trigger fear and the mind begins looking for danger. Trigger shame and the mind begins looking for relief. Trigger belonging and the mind begins defending the group. Trigger outrage and the mind begins simplifying complexity into enemies. Trigger desire and the mind begins justifying pursuit. Trigger urgency and the mind begins bypassing reflection. This is why manipulation targets feeling, not intellect. It does not attack intelligence directly. It activates the nervous system. It narrows perception. It attaches emotional charge to symbols, people, headlines, images, phrases, enemies, identities, or promised rewards. Once the emotional state has shifted, thinking begins to organize around that state. People may still use logic. They may still give arguments. They may still appear intelligent. But the emotional frame has already decided what kind of argument will feel convincing. This is why highly intelligent people can still be manipulated. Their intelligence does not make them immune if the emotional system has already been captured. They are threatened by feeling. They are defending against the vulnerability, messiness, uncertainty, or exposure that feeling would bring. So they move into logic as armor. But armor is not clarity. It may protect the self from being overwhelmed, but it can also prevent the self from receiving information. This is why the episode is not about choosing emotion over logic. That would only create another false divide. We explored that in episode 5. The aim is not to worship emotion, obey every feeling, or treat every reaction as truth. Emotion can distort, fear can exaggerate, anger can simplify, shame can collapse identity, desire can justify, sadness can narrow possibilities. Emotional hijacking is real. A flooded system does not perceive clearly. But suppression is not clarity either. The work is integration. Emotion needs logic. Logic needs emotion. The body brings a signal. Emotion marks relevance. Thought organizes meaning. Awareness watches the process. Regulation gives the system enough space to respond rather than react. Without emotion, logic has no priority. It has no felt relevance. It has no value system. It may calculate, but it cannot know what matters. Without logic, emotion may flood, distort, or become trapped in immediacy. It may feel intense, but struggle to organize what the feeling means. Without the body, both can become abstract. Without awareness, all of them can become automatic. So the question is not how do I stop being emotional? The question is how do I understand what emotion is signaling before it becomes unconscious behavior? That question changes everything. If anger appears, the question is not only how do I stop being angry? It is what boundary, fear, injustice, shame, or unmet need is being activated. If sadness appears, the question is not only how do I get rid of this? It is what loss, longing, tenderness, or truth is moving through the system. If anxiety appears, the question is not only how do I calm down? It is what future is my body preparing for? If disgust appears, the question is what has my system marked as unsafe, contaminated, or morally wrong? If desire appears, the question is what is this pulling me towards? And is it nourishment or a loop? Emotion becomes a doorway when it is read carefully, but it becomes a cage when it is either obeyed blindly or rejected completely. This is why emotional hijacking is such an important part of the episode. When emotion becomes too intense, too fast, or too identity-bound, the system prioritizes survival over accuracy. It does not ask for nuance, it asks for action, defend, escape, attack, collapse, appease, prove, control, withdraw. The nervous system narrows the field to what feels most urgent. That may protect you in genuine danger, but it can distort life when the trigger belongs partly to memory, identity, belief, or an old pattern. A hijacked emotional system does not feel like interpretation. It feels like reality. The body says danger, and the mind finds danger. The body says rejection, and the mind finds rejection. The ability to remain conscious while emotion moves, and this is where the wider cultural misunderstanding becomes dangerous. When people are taught that emotion is weakness, they do not become clearer. They often become less aware of what is driving them. When men are taught not to feel, feeling does not disappear. It may become anger, control, silence, distance, work obsession, addiction, contempt, or physical tension. When women are dismissed as emotional, a valid perception may be ignored because it arrives with feeling. When children are told to stop crying instead of being helped to understand what the crying means, they learn that the emotional signal is shameful. When societies reward detached language over embodied truth, people may become articulate and deeply disconnected. When systems of influence understand this better than individuals do, emotion becomes a battlefield. News cycles use fear and urgency. Social media uses outrage and validation. Advertising uses desire and inadequacy. Political messaging uses threat, belonging, identity, and moral certainty. Group dynamics use shame and acceptance. Manipulators use love bombing, withdrawal, guilt, fear, confusion, and intermittent relief. All of these work because the emotional system is not secondary, it is primary to how meaning lands. This does not mean people are helpless. It means the first defense is not just more information. The first defense is state awareness. What has this made me feel? What does that feeling make me want to believe? What action does this feeling push me towards? Who benefits if I react from this state? That last question is important because emotional activation often creates momentum. It wants immediate behavior. Share this. Hate them. Buy now. Choose sides. Defend yourself. Prove your point. Collapse into shame. Chase relief. Attack the enemy. Obey the group. The emotional state moves the body before reflection has widened the field. Awareness interrupts that movement. It does not kill emotion. It listens to it. It asks what the signal is, what the story is, what the body is preparing for, and whether the present moment truly requires the reaction being mobilized. This is why emotion is not the enemy. Unconscious emotion can mislead you. Suppressed emotion can control you from underneath. Manipulated emotion can steer your behavior. But understood emotion can inform you. Regulated emotion can guide you. Integrated emotion can deepen intelligence. So as we enter episode 9, the invitation is not to become less emotional. It is to become more honest about emotion, to stop pretending logic floats above the body, to stop treating feelings as embarrassing interruptions, to stop letting emotional charge become automatic truth, to stop allowing external systems to trigger your nervous system and then call the reaction your opinion. The deeper invitation is to learn the emotional language of the interface, because you do not think clearly by removing emotion. You think clearly by understanding what emotion is doing. Emotion is not the enemy of consciousness. Unexamined emotion is, and the moment you begin to read the feeling before it becomes the story, you begin to reclaim the part of intelligence you were taught to distrust. Part 2, Anchor Concept. Emotion versus logic is a false divide. The anchor concept for this episode is that emotion and logic are not enemies. They are not two separate forces battling inside the human being, with logic representing intelligence and emotion representing weakness. That is the old frame. It is familiar, but it is incomplete. Emotion is not separate from cognition. It is part of cognition. It is part of how attention is directed, how meaning is assigned, how decisions are weighted, how memory is recalled, and how behavior becomes possible. The idea that emotion interrupts intelligence only tells part of the story. Emotion can interrupt intelligence when it becomes overwhelming, dysregulated, or hijacked. But emotion also makes intelligence useful. Without emotion, the mind would struggle to know what matters. It could process information, compare data, calculate outcomes, and organize details, but it would not have the same felt sense of relevance. It would not know what to prioritize. It would not know what to move towards, what to avoid, what to protect, what to value, or what to grieve. Emotion is not noise. Emotion is a signal. That is the shift. When you feel something, the body-brain system is not simply malfunctioning. It is marking importance. It is saying, pay attention here. The interpretation may still need checking. The feeling may be amplified by memory, identity, fear, or expectation. But the presence of emotion means the system has detected relevance. Something matters to you. Something has touched safety, belonging, dignity, loss, threat, desire, injustice, attachment, shame, love, or meaning. This is why removing emotion does not automatically create clarity. Sometimes it creates distance. Sometimes it creates numbness. Sometimes it creates the illusion of objectivity while the emotional system continues operating underneath. The person may sound calm. They may sound rational. They may use structured arguments. But if fear, shame, pride, resentment, control, or the need to be right is still shaping what evidence they select, what tone they use, and what outcome they defend, then emotion has not been removed. It has simply gone underground. This is the false divide. Logic does not operate in a vacuum. Logic operates on top of emotional weighting. Before the mind reasons, the system has often already decided what feels relevant, threatening, desirable, absurd, offensive, or important. Logic then enters the field and begins organizing the material that the emotional system has already highlighted. That does not mean logic is fake. It means logic is embodied. Your reasoning is still taking place through a nervous system. It is still influenced by whether you feel safe or threatened, ashamed or confident, rested or exhausted, connected or isolated, regulated or flooded. The same argument may feel persuasive in one state and irritating in another. The same fact may feel important when it supports your identity and inconvenient when it challenges it. The same criticism may feel useful when you are grounded and humiliating when you are already carrying shame. The logic may be clean, but the receiving system is never neutral. This is why emotion is deeply involved in decision-making. Decisions are not made by information alone. They are made by value, and value is emotional. What matters? What is worth the cost? What feels safe? What feels meaningful? What outcome do I care about? What risk can I tolerate? What loss would hurt? What future feels possible? These are not cold questions. They involve the whole system. A person may create a logical list of options, but the decision still requires felt weighting. Which one matters more? Which one aligns with my values? Which one feels like integrity? Which one protects something important? Which one gives my life direction? Logic can compare the options, but emotion helps assign significance. This is why someone can know the right answer logically and still not move. The body has not agreed. The emotional system has not found safety, meaning, or readiness. A person may know they need to leave a situation, but fear keeps them attached. They may know they need to change a habit, but shame makes change feel impossible. They may know they need rest, but guilt keeps them working. They may know they need to speak honestly, but fear of rejection silences them. Logic alone cannot override the emotional architecture if the body still experiences the action as a threat. This is not irrationality in the simple sense. It is a signal conflict. One part of the system understands. Another part is not yet safe enough to act. That is why emotional regulation matters more than emotional suppression. Suppression says, ignore the signal. Regulation says, let the signal become readable. Suppression may create temporary control, but regulation creates a relationship. When emotion is regulated, it becomes information that can be included. When emotion is suppressed, it may leak through tension, projection, resentment, numbness, impulsivity, or sudden collapse. When emotion is hijacked, it becomes command. When emotion is integrated, it becomes guidance. The goal is not to remove emotion from thinking. The goal is to make emotion conscious enough that thinking can include it without being dominated by it. That is a very different kind of intelligence. Because emotion also shapes attention. What you feel affects what you notice. Fear makes threat cues brighter. Anger makes the offense more visible. Shame makes judgment more visible. Desire makes opportunity more visible. Grief makes absence more visible. Love makes connections more visible. Pride makes achievement more visible. Guilt makes responsibility more visible. Each emotional state changes the interface. This does not mean the state is always wrong. Fear may detect danger. Anger may detect a violation. Shame may reveal exposure. Sadness may reveal loss. Desire may reveal longing. Guilt may reveal conscience. But each emotional state also narrows around certain kinds of meaning. It selects, it filters, it amplifies. That is why emotional awareness is part of perceptual accuracy. If you do not know what emotional state you are in, you may not know what your perception is emphasizing. You may believe you are seeing the whole field when really you are seeing the field through fear, hurt, shame, pride, desire, or grief. The feeling does not invalidate the perception, but it tells you the perception has a tone, and tone matters. This connects back to memory as well. Emotion shapes what you remember, and memory shapes what you feel. If a present situation activates an old emotional memory, the current perception may become layered with past meaning. A neutral comment may feel like criticism because it touches an old shame memory. A delayed reply may feel like abandonment because it touches an old attachment wound. A disagreement may feel like disrespect because it touches on an old experience of being dismissed. The emotional system is not responding only to the event. It is responding to the event, plus memory, prediction, identity, and bodily state. That is why emotion can seem irrational from the outside. Someone else sees the current event and thinks, why are they reacting so strongly? But the body may not be reacting only to the visible event. It may be reacting to a whole memory network that has been activated. The reaction may be disproportionate to the present, but proportionate to the system's history. This is why dismissing emotion as irrational misses the point. The emotion may not give a complete reading of the present, but it may reveal the depth of what has been touched. It may be showing where memory still lives in the body. It may be showing where identity feels threatened. It may be showing where the system has not yet integrated something. Emotion is data, but it is not always a verdict. That distinction is essential. If you treat emotion as a verdict, you may obey every feeling as truth. I feel unsafe, therefore I am unsafe. I feel rejected, therefore I have been rejected. I feel angry, therefore I must have been wronged. I feel certain, therefore I am right. That can lead to distortion, projection, and reaction. But if you treat emotion as meaningless noise, you may dismiss vital information. I feel uneasy, but I will ignore it. I feel hurt, but it does not matter. I feel angry, but anger is wrong. I feel grief, but I should be over it. That can lead to disconnection, suppression, and self-betrayal. The integrated position is different. It says, emotion is a signal. I will listen to it, but I will not let it become the whole story. I will ask what it is pointing towards, what it is protecting, what it may be amplifying, and what other information is needed. That is where logic becomes valuable. Logic helps organize the signal. It asks for context, it checks evidence. It separates impact from intention. It distinguishes the past from the present. It slows down the first interpretation. It helps emotion become communicable. But logic should not be used to crush emotion. It should be used to understand it. The clearest thinking does not come from emotionless detachment. It comes from regulated integration. You can feel and still think. You can think and still feel. You can be moved without being hijacked. You can be rational without being disconnected. That is the deeper intelligence. This becomes especially important in relationships. Many relational breakdowns are not caused by emotion itself, but by the failure to understand emotion as a signal. One person feels hurt and expresses it with intensity. The other person hears the attack and moves into defense. One person says, "You are being emotional." The other says, "You do not care." Now the conversation has become a war between emotional expression and rational defense, when underneath both are signals. The hurt person may be signaling, something matters. I feel unseen. I need this to be understood. The defensive person may be signaling, I feel accused. I feel unsafe. I need to protect myself from shame. If neither person can read the signal, they fight over the surface. If both can read the signal, the conversation changes. Instead of "you are too emotional," the question becomes, what is this emotion carrying? Instead of "I am just being rational," the question becomes, what feeling might my rationality be defending against? That shift does not make the conversation soft, it makes it more precise. Because a lot of what people call rationality is actually controlled emotional avoidance. And a lot of what people call emotionality is actually an unstructured signal. Both need integration. In public debate, the same issue appears at scale. People argue as if they are exchanging logic, but often they are protecting emotional identities, fear of losing status, fear of being wrong, fear of being excluded from the group, shame around not knowing, anger at perceived injustice, desire to belong, need to feel morally clean, need to feel awake, intelligent, compassionate, strong, or correct. The arguments may be logical in form, but emotional in function. This is why people rarely change their minds through facts alone. A fact that threatens identity will not land like neutral information. It may land in danger. The emotional system asks, what happens to me if this is true? What happens to my belongings, my self-image, my history, my moral position, my group? If the answer feels threatening, the mind may reject the fact before it has been properly examined. This is not because people are stupid. It is because information enters through the state. That is why manipulation targets emotion. If someone can activate fear, outrage, shame, pride, belonging, urgency, or desire, they can influence what feels true before thought has fully examined it. The emotional state becomes the frame. Once the frame is active, logic often becomes the servant of the state. You can see this in headlines, adverts, political messaging, social media, relationship manipulation, and group dynamics. The message does not simply give information. It creates a feeling. It makes you feel threatened, special, guilty, hopeful, angry, excluded, chosen, inadequate, or superior. Then it offers a conclusion, action, product, enemy, identity, or belief that fits the feeling. The feeling prepares the mind. This is why emotional literacy is protective. If you can notice the feeling being created, you are less likely to be unconsciously driven by it. You can ask, what state is this trying to put me in? What behavior does this state make more likely? What conclusion feels obvious only because this emotion has been activated? Who benefits from me reacting while I am in this state? That is not emotional suppression. That is emotional sovereignty. It is the ability to feel without being steered. The anchor concept here also asks us to reconsider what clarity really is. Clarity is not the absence of feeling. Clarity is the ability to include feeling without losing proportion. If you are angry and regulated, anger may help you recognize a boundary. If you are angry and hijacked, anger may make every obstacle look like an enemy. If you are afraid and regulated, fear may help you assess risk. If you are afraid and hijacked, fear may turn uncertainty into danger. If you are sad and regulated, sadness may reveal loss and value. If you are sad and hijacked, sadness may become a totalizing story about hopelessness. The same emotion can become wisdom or a distortion depending on regulation. That is why the question is not, is this emotion good or bad? The question is this emotion integrated or hijacked? A regulated emotion remains in communication with the rest of the system. It can update, it can listen, it can take in new information, it can shift with context. A hijacked emotion becomes rigid. It wants confirmation. It rejects contradiction. It turns the body state into reality. It makes the reaction feel urgent and justified. This connects with the previous episode on memory. A hijacked emotion often carries old memories into the present. It does not say, this reminds me of danger. It says, this is danger. It does not say, this resembles rejection. It says, I am being rejected. It collapses time. It makes the past current. Regulation reopens the time. It says, this feels familiar, but I need to check whether it is the same. It allows the present to be investigated rather than absorbed into the past. This is why emotional regulation is not only a wellness idea. It is a perception skill. It determines how much reality you can receive before reacting. It widens the interface. It allows ambiguity. It lets you hold complexity without rushing to closure. It helps thoughts become more accurate because emotion is no longer forcing the frame too quickly. The opposite of emotional regulation is not emotion. It is an emotional capture. Emotional capture can happen in two directions. You can be captured by intensity, where the feeling floods everything, or you can be captured by suppression, where the feeling is denied but continues shaping behavior from underneath. Both are forms of unconscious emotion. A person who explodes in anger is being driven by emotion. A person who coldly punishes through silence may also be driven by emotion. A person who panics is being driven by emotion. A person who intellectualizes every vulnerability may also be driven by emotion. A person who cries may be emotional. A person who refuses to feel may be emotional in a different way. So the aim is not to appear calm. The aim is to become conscious. Calm can be regulation, but it can also be shut down. Intensity can be dysregulation, but it can also be an honest signal. You have to look deeper than presentation. This is one of the most important corrections to the emotion versus logic divide. The outer style does not tell you whether the system is integrated. Someone can speak softly and be manipulative. Someone can speak strongly and be truthful. Someone can use rational language to avoid accountability. Someone can cry and still be accurate. Someone can remain composed because they are grounded. Someone can remain composed because they are disconnected. So we need better questions than who is emotional and who is logical. We need to ask, what is the emotion carrying? What is the logic organizing? What is the body signaling? What is the identity defending? What information is being included? What information is being excluded? Can the system update? These questions move us from judgment into discernment, and discernment is the real aim. Discernment is not coldness. It is not a reaction. It is the capacity to feel the signal, examine the story, include the body, check the evidence, and respond with proportion. It is the bridge between emotion and logic. It does not reject either. It lets both serve clarity. This is why the anchor concept is so central to the series. If the brain were an app, emotion would not be a bug in the system. It would be part of the notification architecture. It flags what matters. It alerts the interface. It changes priority. It marks urgency. It colors memory. It shapes prediction. It influences attention. Sometimes the notification is accurate. Sometimes it is outdated. Sometimes it is too loud. Sometimes it is triggered by old settings. But the answer is not to disable the entire system. The answer is to understand what the notification means, where it came from, and whether it belongs to the present moment. Emotion is part of the operating system. Logic is part of the operating system. The body is part of the operating system. Memory is part of the operating system. Awareness is what allows the system to observe itself. So the anchor concept is this. Emotion versus logic is a false divide. Emotion is not separate from cognition. It is part of decision-making, attention, meaning assignment, memory, behavior, and perception. Logic does not become clearer by pretending emotion is absent. It becomes clearer when emotion is regulated, named, understood, and integrated. You do not remove emotion to think clearly. You learn to read it, and when you can read it, emotion stops being the enemy and becomes one of the most important signals in the whole interface. Part 3. The hidden layer. Emotion is the first interpreter. The hidden layer in this episode is that emotion often interprets reality before thought has had time to explain it. Before you have built the sentence, before you have formed the opinion, before you have created the argument, the emotional system may already have marked the moment as safe, unsafe, important, threatening, desirable, shameful, familiar, or wrong. Thought arrives afterwards and begins to organize what the body has already started to feel. This is why emotion can feel so immediate. It does not wait for a full report. It moves quickly because the system is designed to detect relevance before conscious analysis catches up. Emotion assigns meaning before thought. A look, a pause, a headline, a tone, a message, a facial expression, a silence, a shift in atmosphere, these can all reach the body before the mind has fully understood them. The nervous system begins asking, is this safe? Is this a danger? Is this rejection? Is this a connection? Is this disrespect? Is this an opportunity? Is this familiar? The first interpretation may not be accurate, but it is active. It has already started shaping perception. This is why emotional awareness matters so much. If you do not notice the feeling, you may mistake the feeling's interpretation for reality itself. Fear may say this is dangerous, shame may say I am exposed, anger may say I have been violated, desire may say this is what I need, grief may say something is gone, disgust may say this is wrong. These signals may contain real information, but they are not final verdicts. They are openings, they are the system saying, look here. The work is to look carefully, not to obey blindly. Emotion shapes perception because emotional state changes what becomes visible. When you are afraid, the world gives you more threats. When you are ashamed, the world gives you more judgment. When you are angry, the world gives you more offense. When you are lonely, the world gives you more signs of distance. When you are regulated, the world often gives you more nuance. The same situation can look completely different, depending on the state of the system receiving it. That is not a weakness. That is the interface working through the state. This is something I have recognized deeply through my own observations and work. A lot of what I have explored through this place called Earth, the Inversiverse, the Resonance Matrix, and the Consciousness Code comes from noticing that people are not usually moved by information alone. They are moved by the emotional state that information enters through. I have seen how a story, a symbol, a headline, a political frame, a public event, a social media post, or even a single phrase can shift people before they have really thought about what is being presented. The feeling arrives first. The body tightens, opens, recoils, desires, fears, or aligns. Then the mind begins explaining the reaction as if it were purely rational. I have had to notice that in myself as well. When I sense manipulation, coercion, emotional bait, or incongruence, the signal often comes before the clear explanation. Something in the body notices the frame, something recognizes the emotional charge, something detects that the words are not only communicating information, but trying to create a state. Earlier in my work, those signals may have come through with more intensity because I was still learning how to organize them. Over time, the work has become less about reacting to the signal and more about reading it, not dismissing it, not worshipping it, but asking, what is this feeling showing me, and what story am I building from it? That distinction is important. Emotion can reveal, but it can also recruit. It can show you something meaningful, but it can also pull you into a frame too quickly. If you feel outrage, it may be because something is genuinely wrong, but it may also be because outrage has been engineered into the presentation. If you feel fear, there may be a risk, but fear may also have been activated to narrow your interpretation. If you feel a sense of belonging, the connection may be real, but belonging may also be used to make you defend a group identity before you have examined its claims. So the hidden layer is not simply that emotion comes first. It is that emotion that becomes the first frame. It decides what kind of meaning the mind is likely to build. The mind then often believes it is concluding, when really it is expanding the emotional premise that was already active. This is why two people can be shown the same information and reach completely different conclusions. They are not only processing data, they are receiving the data through different emotional states, histories, identities, and nervous system expectations. This also explains why people defend beliefs so fiercely. Emotion does not only interpret external reality, emotion defends identity. If a belief is tied to belonging, then contradiction may feel like exile. If a belief is tied to intelligence, then correction may feel like humiliation. If a belief is tied to morality, then uncertainty may feel like corruption. If a belief is tied to awakening, then doubt may feel like falling asleep again. The emotional system protects the self-image before the rational mind has had time to examine the evidence. That is why people are often not defending facts. They are defending what the feeling protects. A person may defend an argument because beneath it is the fear of being wrong. They may defend a relationship because beneath it is the fear of abandonment. They may defend a group because beneath it is the fear of isolation. They may defend a memory because beneath it is the fear of losing identity. They may defend a worldview because beneath it is the emotional relief of certainty. This is where emotion and memory connect. Directly. A current feeling can activate an old memory, and an old memory can shape the current feeling. If you have been dismissed before, disagreement may feel like dismissal. If you have been controlled before, guidance may feel like control. If you have been shamed before, feedback may feel like exposure. The emotion is not only responding to the present, it is responding to now through then. And because the body does not always separate past from present cleanly, the current moment can become loaded with remembered meaning. The same happens culturally. Groups carry emotional memory. They remember humiliation, victory, betrayal, sacrifice, persecution, pride, loss, and injustice. These memories become emotional identities. Once that happens, messages do not land neutrally. They land inside inherited feelings. A phrase, flag, symbol, institution, accent, or label can activate a whole emotional field. The person may think they are reacting to the present, but they are also reacting through a collective memory structure. An emotion that is fused with identity becomes a reaction. An emotion that is regulated can reveal meaning. An emotion that is hijacked can narrow perception. The question is not, can I trust my feelings? The better question is, can I ride my feelings without becoming completely absorbed by them? That is the skill. To feel anger and ask what boundary is being signaled, without automatically turning someone into an enemy. To feel fear and ask what risk is present, without letting fear write the whole future. To feel shame and ask what part of the self feels exposed, without collapsing into identity. To feel desire and ask whether it is nourishment or capture. To feel sadness and ask what loss, value, or truth is being revealed. To feel certainty and ask what uncertainty it may be defending against. Emotion is the first interpreter, but it does not have to be the final author. That line matters because the first interpretation often carries the most charge. It arrives quickly, it feels embodied, it demands a story, but awareness allows you to pause before the story hardens. It lets you say, this is what I feel, but what else might be true? This is what my body is signaling, but what is the wider context? This is what the emotion wants me to believe, but what information is missing? This is the first meaning, but is it the deepest one? Sometimes you are defending the feeling beneath them, and when you can see what the feeling is protecting, you begin to reclaim the space where real clarity can enter. Part 4, the expansion field, emotional hijacking, manipulation, and amplified. Feeling. This is where emotion moves beyond the personal and enters the wider field. Relationships, media, social systems, group dynamics, manipulation, and the way entire environments can be designed to move the nervous system before conscious thought has had time to catch up. Because once you understand that emotion is not the enemy, but a signal, you also begin to see why emotion is so often targeted. If emotion marks meaning, urgency, belonging, threat, shame, desire, and value, then emotion is not a side issue. It is one of the main access points into human behavior. The first layer here is emotional hijacking. This is what happens when a fast, automatic emotional reaction overrides slower cognition. The body moves before reflection has widened the field. The nervous system does not ask, what is the most accurate interpretation? It asks, what response keeps me safe? Survival takes priority over accuracy. Fight, flight, freeze, and fawn are not abstract ideas in that moment. They are living patterns. Fight moves towards defense, confrontation, argument, attack, proving, correcting, or forcing the issue. Flight moves away through avoidance, distraction, leaving, disappearing, changing the subject, or escaping the emotional field. Freeze locks the system where thought slows, speech disappears, and the person feels unable to act. Fawn adapts to the other person, smoothing, appeasing, agreeing, over-explaining, or abandoning the self in order to reduce threat. When emotion hijacks the system, perception narrows. The mind does not see the whole situation. It sees what the state allows. If fear is active, danger becomes more visible. If shame is active, judgment becomes more visible. If anger is active, offense becomes more visible. If desire is active, possibility becomes more visible. If belonging is threatened, loyalty becomes more important than accuracy. This is why emotional hijacking is so powerful. It does not feel like distortion from the inside. It feels like clarity. The body says, this matters now, and thought begins serving the state. This is why manipulation targets emotion. People are not controlled primarily through logic. They are influenced through fear, belonging, shame, desire, and urgency. You do not need to control what people think if you can control what they feel, because thinking often follows the emotional frame. Trigger fear, and people search for protection. Trigger shame, and people search for relief. Trigger belonging, and people defend the group. Trigger desire, and people justify pursuit. Trigger urgency, and people stop reflecting. Trigger disgust, and people dehumanize. Trigger moral outrage, and people simplify the field into good and evil. This has been central to much of my work, because the hijack is not usually an attack on intelligence. It is an attack on the state. A person can be intelligent, educated, articulate, and still be moved if their emotional system is activated in the right way. In fact, intelligence can sometimes make the emotional frame harder to challenge, because the mind can build sophisticated arguments to defend what the body has already decided feels true. The issue is not that the person cannot think. It is the emotional state that has already decided what kind of thinking will feel safe, loyal, moral, or necessary. You can see this clearly in the media. A headline not only informs, it primes. A photograph not only shows, it frames. A repeated phrase does not only describe, it trains emotional response. The system is triggered, amplified, repeated, and stabilized. Trigger, amplify, repeat, stabilize. That is one of the simplest ways emotional fields become belief fields. A story activates fear. That fear is amplified through imagery, repetition, commentary, outrage, and social proof. Then the same emotional response is repeated until it becomes familiar. Once familiar, it stabilizes into what everyone knows. At that point, many people no longer remember when the feeling was installed. They simply experience the conclusion as obvious. Social media does this at speed. It compresses outrage, comparison, humor, grief, desire, shame, identity, belonging, and threat into the same feed. One moment you are laughing, the next you are angry, the next you are comparing your life, the next you are being invited to fear something, buy something, hate someone, admire someone, or join a side. The nervous system is being moved rapidly, and because the movement is normalized, many people do not notice how much of their thinking is now emerging from emotional saturation. They think they are browsing, but the system is being shaped. They think they are choosing responses, but the platform is often arranging emotional cues. News cycles do something similar through urgency. Breaking, developing, crisis, warning, threat, outrage, scandal, disaster. These words are not neutral. They cue the body. They tell the nervous system to prepare. And when people live inside constant urgency, they begin to lose the ability to distinguish between what is truly important and what has simply been made emotionally loud. This is one of the hidden costs of emotional amplification. The system becomes reactive, and reactivity begins to feel like awareness. Group dynamics take this even deeper, because groups not only share ideas, they share emotional states. You can enter a group and feel the atmosphere before anyone explains it. You can sense who is allowed to speak, who is being judged, who is being protected, who is being scapegoated, what opinions are safe, what emotions are rewarded, and what kind of language gets approval. This is something I have noticed in my own life, in friend groups, online groups, and wider social environments. Sometimes the group has an emotional current running through it before a single clear argument has been made. There may be tension, suspicion, excitement, superiority, resentment, fear, or loyalty in the field, and if you are not careful, you can begin carrying that feeling as if it started inside you. That is one of the most subtle things about group emotion. You can borrow a feeling without realizing it. You can enter a room calm and leave irritated because the field was irritated. You can enter a discussion uncertain and leave certain because the group rewards certainty. You can begin with curiosity and end with judgment because the emotional gravity of the group pulled you into its rhythm. This does not mean groups are bad. Groups can regulate, support, inspire, and protect. But they can also amplify states until those states feel like the truth. I have found this especially important when noticing how friend groups can create invisible pressure. Sometimes it is not direct coercion. No one says, "You must think this." It is more subtle. A joke lands in a certain way. A silence follows a certain comment. Approval gathers around one interpretation. Doubt feels awkward. If you question the emotional direction of the group, you can feel the shift immediately. The nervous system knows when belonging is at risk. That is why people often go along with things they do not fully agree with. Not because they have reasoned it through, but because exclusion is felt before it is thought. This is where emotional contagion begins to enter the picture, and we will explore that more fully in the coming episodes as the series moves into the social brain, group nervous systems, and collective drift. For now, the key point is that nervous systems sync. Groups share emotional states. Borrowed feeling can become perceived truth. If everyone around you is afraid, your body may begin looking for danger. If everyone around you is outraged, your mind may begin looking for offense. If everyone around you is mocking someone, you may begin to see that person through contempt before you have examined them properly. The group state becomes the lens. This is how emotional amplification systems work. Social media, news cycles, and group dynamics all use similar mechanisms: trigger, amplify, repeat, stabilize. First, something activates emotion. Then the environment amplifies it through repetition, agreement, imagery, language, rhythm, or social proof. Then the emotional response is repeated until it becomes familiar. Then the familiar response stabilizes into belief, identity, or group reality. Once that happens, people no longer feel like they are reacting. They feel like they are seeing clearly. But emotion is not always what it appears to be. This is another hidden layer. Anger may be masking fear. Control may be masking insecurity. Detachment may be masking overwhelm. Confidence may be masking shame. Sarcasm may be masking hurt. Moral certainty may be masking anxiety. Calm may be masking a shutdown. Desire may be masking emptiness. Outrage may be masking helplessness. Emotion often wears a costume. This is why mislabeled emotion is so dangerous. If you think you are angry, you may attack when the deeper signal is fear. If you think you are in control, you may tighten when the deeper signal is insecurity. If you think you are detached, you may call yourself rational when the deeper signal is overwhelm. If you think you are simply being honest, you may not notice the cruelty that is carrying your shame. If you think you are protecting the truth, you may not notice that you are protecting belonging. Emotion does not always present itself honestly. The first emotion is not always the deepest. The loudest emotion is not always the root emotion. A person may show anger because fear feels too vulnerable. They may show superiority because shame feels unbearable. They may show coldness because grief would collapse them. They may show control because uncertainty feels unsafe. This is why emotional awareness has to go beneath the surface. Not just what am I feeling, but what is this feeling protecting me from feeling? That question changes the field. If anger is protecting fear, then attacking the anger may miss the fear. If control is protecting insecurity, then arguing against control may intensify it. If detachment is protecting overwhelm, then demanding emotional openness may create more shutdown. This applies in relationships, families, groups, and public discourse. People often fight the visible emotion while missing the hidden one. They argue with the mask and never meet the wound beneath it. This is why emotional manipulation works so well. It often activates one emotion while hiding another. A message may appear to offer belonging, but underneath it activates fear of exclusion. A campaign may appear to offer empowerment, but underneath it activates shame. A leader may appear to offer certainty, but underneath, they activate insecurity. A platform may appear to offer connection, but underneath it activates comparison and lack. The visible promise is one emotional state, the hidden mechanism is another. This is also why the emotional system needs discernment. If emotion is a signal, then the task is not to obey every signal immediately. The task is to read the signal accurately. What is the surface emotion? What is the deeper emotion? What is the emotion asking me to do? What is making it harder to see? What behavior becomes more likely if I stay in this state? Who or what is amplifying it? This is where your sovereignty begins, not in having no emotion, but in recognizing when emotion is being recruited. You can feel fear without letting fear write the whole interpretation. You can feel belonging without surrendering discernment to the group. You can feel shame without chasing relief through compliance. You can feel desire without being captured by the thing that triggered it. You can feel urgency without allowing urgency to erase reflection. Emotional hijacking says, act now. Emotional awareness says, read first. Manipulation says, feel this, then think from it. Awareness says, I can feel this and still ask where it came from. Group emotion says, join the field. Awareness says, is this mine or have I absorbed it? That pause is not a weakness. It is the beginning of freedom. This matters because the modern world is saturated with emotional signals. Not only information, signals, anger signals, fear signals, desire signals, belonging signals, shame signals, urgency signals. Every platform, every headline, every group, every brand, every public conflict competes to move the body. If you do not understand emotion, you are more easily moved. If you treat emotion as weakness, you may miss the way it is being used. If you suppress emotion, you may lose access to the very signals that would tell you something is wrong. The answer is not to become numb. Numbness is not freedom. The answer is not to become reactive either. Reactivity is not truth. The answer is emotional literacy, the ability to feel, name, regulate, question, and integrate emotion without being captured by it. Because emotional hijacking overrides cognition. Manipulation targets feeling because thinking follows the state. Amplification systems trigger, amplify, repeat, and stabilize emotional frames. Mislabeled emotion hides the deeper signal. Emotional contagion spreads through nervous systems and becomes especially powerful in groups. And all of this builds towards the wider arc of the coming episodes, where we will look more deeply at the social brain, borrowed feeling, collective states, and the way group nervous systems shape perception. For now, the core recognition is this: emotion is not the enemy, but unexamined emotion can be used as an entry point into your perception, into your behavior, into your identity, into your belonging, into your memory, into what you defend as truth. So when you feel the emotional surge, do not only ask, is this feeling valid? Ask, what is this feeling doing? Is it opening perception or narrowing it? Is it revealing a signal or recruiting me into a frame? Is it mine or have I absorbed it from the field? Is it protecting something true or protecting an identity that does not want to be questioned? Because the moment you can ask that, the emotion stops being a puppet string and becomes information. And that is when feeling begins to serve awareness rather than replace it. Part 5 Field Case. Why smart people act irrationally? The field case for this episode is the intelligent person who reacts emotionally and then cannot see that emotion has already shaped the argument. This could be in a relationship, a workplace, a friend group, an online debate, a family conversation, or a public discussion. Someone may be articulate, informed, technically skilled, educated, experienced, and still respond in a way that looks irrational from the outside. But the deeper point is this: they did not stop being intelligent. Their system prioritized survival over accuracy. That line matters because people often misunderstand what is happening. They look at an intelligent person reacting defensively, over-explaining, attacking, withdrawing, doubling down, or refusing to hear another perspective, and they say, how can someone so clever not see this? But intelligence does not stop the nervous system from activating. It does not stop shame from rising. It does not stop identity from being threatened. It does not stop fear from narrowing perception. It does not stop belonging from becoming more important than truth in a charged moment. When emotion takes over, intelligence does not disappear. It gets recruited. The person may still think quickly. They may still argue well. They may still use facts, language, logic, examples, and evidence. But now those tools may be serving protection rather than accuracy. Thought becomes justification. The mind starts building a case for the state the body is already in. If the person feels attacked, the mind gathers evidence that an attack is happening. If they feel shamed, the mind finds reasons why the other person is unfair. If identity is threatened, the mind defends the identity. If belonging is at risk, the mind protects the group. This is why emotional state narrows perception. In a regulated state, the person may be able to include multiple layers: what was said, what was meant, what was felt, what was missed, what they contributed, what the other person carried, what the wider context was. But in an activated state, the field collapses. The system wants the shortest route to safety. It wants to be right, safe, protected, vindicated, accepted, or free from shame. Accuracy becomes secondary. You can see this in arguments where two people are both intelligent, but both are emotionally activated in different ways. One person feels criticized, so they become defensive. The other feels unheard, so they become more intense. The defensive person interprets intensity as attack. The intense person interprets defensiveness as avoidance. Now both are reacting emotionally while debating logic. They may talk about facts, timelines, wording, fairness, intention, evidence, and principle, but underneath the debate is an emotional mismatch. One nervous system is trying to reduce shame. Another is trying to be recognized. One is defending identity. Another is defending impact. One wants calm before truth. Another wants the truth before calm. And because neither can see the emotional state shaping the argument, both believe the problem is the other person's lack of logic. This is where arguments escalate. People debate logic while reacting emotionally. One person says, I'm just being rational, but the body may be defending against vulnerability. Another says, you're not listening, but the body may be responding to old hurt. One says, that doesn't make sense. The other hears, your experience is invalid. One says, calm down. The other hears, your emotion disqualifies your truth. The content becomes secondary to the nervous system message underneath it. When identity gets activated, the reaction becomes even stronger. If someone sees themselves as fair, being accused of unfairness can feel unbearable. If they see themselves as intelligent, being corrected can feel humiliating. If they see themselves as kind, Being told they caused harm can feel like an attack on the whole self. If they see themselves as awake, being challenged can feel like being pushed back into the category they reject. The reaction is not only to the information, it is to what the information threatens. That is why smart people can become rigid, not because they lack intelligence, but because the emotional cost of updating feels too high. To update may mean admitting they were wrong, influenced, reactive, unfair, misled, unkind, afraid, ashamed, or incomplete. That is not just a cognitive update. That is an identity update, and the nervous system may treat an identity update as a threat. This also happens in group settings. An intelligent person may privately have doubts, but if the group has an emotional expectation, the person may defend the group position anyway. Belonging becomes the emotional frame. The mind then finds reasons to support what belonging requires. Again, the person did not become stupid. Their system prioritized social safety over independent accuracy. This is why emotional regulation is so important for clear thinking. Regulation gives the system enough space to stay curious, enough space to hear a contradiction, enough space to separate criticism from annihilation, enough space to feel shame without becoming defensive, enough space to notice I am reacting right now, and my reaction may be shaping what I can see. That one moment can change everything, because the problem is not intelligence. The problem is what intelligence is serving in the moment. Is it serving truth, or is it serving protection? Is it helping the system update, or helping the system defend? Is it widening perception, or strengthening the emotional frame? In this field case, the intelligent person reacts irrationally because emotion has narrowed the field, identity has been activated, and thought has become justification. They may still sound logical, they may still produce arguments, but the logic is now being used to protect the state, and this is something worth recognizing in yourself too. When you feel the urge to prove, defend, correct, withdraw, attack, or explain with too much force, pause and ask, what is my intelligence serving right now? Is it helping me see more clearly, or helping me avoid what this emotion has touched? Because real intelligence is not just the ability to argue, it is the ability to notice when the argument has become armor. Part 6. The cognitive shift. The cognitive shift in this episode is the movement from seeing emotion as interference to seeing emotion as part of the system that determines what kind of thinking becomes possible. The old frame says, emotion interferes with clear thinking. The new frame says, emotion determines what thinking becomes possible. That does not mean every emotion is accurate. It does not mean every feeling should be obeyed. It means emotion shapes the field before thought begins organizing it. Emotion decides what feels important, what feels threatening, what feels urgent, what feels meaningful, and what information the mind is likely to prioritize. Emotion is not the enemy. Emotion is a filter, a signal, and an amplifier. As a filter, it changes what you notice. Fear filters for danger, shame filters for judgment, anger filters for violation, grief filters for absence, desire filters for possibility, belonging filters for acceptance and rejection. As a signal, emotion tells you something has become meaningful to the system. Something has touched memory, safety, identity, value, connection, loss, hope, or threat. As an amplifier, emotion turns certain details up. It makes one phrase louder, one look heavier, one possibility more attractive, one risk more urgent, one story more convincing. This is why emotional awareness is cognitive clarity. If you do not know what emotional state you are in, you may not know what kind of thinking that state is producing. You may think you are seeing the situation clearly, when really you are seeing what fear allows you to see. You may think you are being logical when shame has already selected the conclusion that protects your identity. You may think you are being discerning when anger has made every ambiguity look like evidence. You may think you are being realistic when disappointment has narrowed the future before it has arrived. The key question is, what is my emotional state allowing me to see, and what is it hiding? That question changes the whole relationship to feeling. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this emotion, you ask, what has this emotion made visible? And then, just as importantly, what has it made invisible? Fear may reveal risk, but hide possibility. Anger may reveal a boundary, but hide vulnerability. Shame may reveal exposure, but hide context. Desire may reveal longing, but hide consequence. Sadness may reveal loss, but hide capacity. Pride may reveal achievement, but hide humility. Each emotional state contains information, but no emotional state contains the entire field. This is why regulation matters more than suppression. Suppression tries to silence the emotion. Regulation tries to create enough space to understand it. Suppression says, I should not feel this. Regulation says, this is here. What is it showing me, and how do I hold it without becoming ruled by it? Suppression pushes the signal underground, where it often returns as tension, irritation, control, avoidance, numbness, or projection. Regulation keeps the signal in relationship with awareness. A regulated system can feel emotion without turning it into automatic behavior. It can feel anger and still ask what is true. It can feel fear and still check the evidence. It can feel shame and still stay present. It can feel grief and still recognize that the future is not closed. It can feel desire and still ask whether the pull is nourishment, relief, or capture. Regulation does not make you less human. It makes you more able to include your humanity without being hijacked by it. This also means curiosity is more useful than reaction. Reaction says, this feeling is the truth. Act from it now. Curiosity says, this feeling is important. Investigate it. Reaction closes the field. Curiosity opens it. Reaction turns emotion into command. Curiosity turns emotion into information. Reaction is fast, certain, and often protective. Curiosity is slower, wider, and more capable of updates. When you feel yourself becoming certain very quickly, that is often the moment to pause. Not because certainty is always wrong, but because emotional certainty can arrive before full perception. Ask, what state am I in? What does this state want me to believe? What story is forming around this feeling? Would I interpret this differently if I were rested, less ashamed, less afraid, less angry, or less desperate for belonging? That is not overthinking. That is state awareness, because the same mind does not think the same way in every state. Under threat, the mind becomes narrower. Under shame, it becomes self-protective. Under anger, it becomes prosecutorial. Under desire, it becomes persuasive. Under grief, it becomes heavy. Under regulation, it becomes more flexible. This is why the new frame matters so much. Emotion determines what thinking becomes possible. The emotional state does not simply sit beside cognition. It shapes the pathway cognition takes. This is also why manipulation works by changing state first. If someone can put you into fear, urgency, shame, outrage, or desire, they have already altered what your thinking can access. The solution is not to become emotionless. It is to become emotionally literate enough to notice the state before you build a worldview from it. So the cognitive shift is this: emotion is not the enemy of clear thinking. Unexamined emotion is a filter, a signal, and an amplifier. It tells you something matters, but it does not always tell you the whole truth. The task is not to remove emotion, but to read it, regulate it, and bring curiosity to what it has made visible. When you can ask, what is my emotional state allowing me to see, and what is it hiding? You stop treating feeling as failure. You begin using feeling as part of perception, not as the whole truth, but as one of the most important signals in the interface. Part 7. The somatic layer. The somatic layer is where emotion becomes impossible to treat as only an idea, because emotion does not begin as a sentence. It begins as a state. It moves through breath, posture, muscle tone, heat, pressure, contraction, collapse, and readiness. Before you can explain what you feel, the body may already be signaling it. The chest tightens. The breath becomes shallow. Heat rises. The stomach drops. The jaw clenches. The shoulders lift. The body prepares before the mind has finished naming the emotion. You don't think your way into emotion. You feel your way into thought. That is the key insight here. A tight chest may tell the system there is a threat. Not always actual danger, but threat as the body understands it. Emotional risk, conflict, exposure, rejection, uncertainty, judgment, or loss of control. The mind may then begin searching for the reason. It may say, they are against me, something is wrong, I need to defend myself, or I need to get out of this. But the body signal may have come first. The thought arrives afterwards, trying to explain the contraction. A shallow breath often carries urgency. The system is preparing for action. It may not feel safe enough to pause, reflect, or widen perception. When breathing becomes fast or restricted, thought often follows that rhythm. It becomes quicker, narrower, and more pressured. The mind begins thinking in deadlines, threats, consequences, and immediate decisions. Urgency in the body becomes urgency in interpretation. Heat can show anger activation. Heat in the face, chest, hands, or stomach can signal mobilization. The body moves towards defense, boundary, confrontation, or correction. Anger may be telling you that something has felt unfair, intrusive, disrespectful, or unsafe. But the heat itself does not tell the whole story. It tells you there is a charge. Awareness still has to ask what the charge is protecting, whether the present situation requires action, and how to respond without becoming consumed by the activation. Collapse often signals overwhelm. The system cannot keep pushing forward, so it drops. The body may feel heavy, tired, numb, foggy, small, or distant. Thought may become slow or hopeless. The mind may say, I can't do this, nothing will change, or there is no point. But again, the body may have shifted first. Collapse is not laziness. It can be the nervous system protecting itself from too much input, too much emotion, too much pressure, or too little capacity. This is why somatic awareness changes emotional intelligence. Instead of only asking, what am I thinking, you begin asking, what is my body doing before the thought forms? Is the chest tightening? Is the breath shortening? Is heat rising? Is the body collapsing? Is the throat closing? Is the stomach bracing? Is the jaw locking? These signals often tell you what kind of emotional frame is beginning to shape perception. Regulated emotion is informative, flexible, and responsive. It gives you a signal without taking the whole system hostage. You can feel anger and still listen. You can feel fear and still check context. You can feel sadness and remain connected to the present. You can feel shame and still stay with yourself. Regulation does not remove emotion. It gives emotion enough space to become readable. The body can signal and awareness can respond. Hijacked emotion is different. It becomes reactive, identity-driven, and narrowing the body. State becomes the whole truth. Fear says danger, and the mind obeys. Anger says attack, and the mind prosecutes. Shame says hide, and the system collapses. Desire says chase, and the mind justifies. The emotion no longer informs perception, it becomes perception. This is where identity enters the body. If an emotion threatens who you believe yourself to be, the reaction becomes stronger. A person who identifies as rational may feel shame when emotion appears, so the body tightens against feeling. A person who identifies as strong may collapse privately but defend publicly. A person who identifies as kind may feel anger and immediately push it away. The body carries the parts of the self that identity does not know how to include. So the work is not to overpower emotion with thought. The work is to build enough relationship with the body that the thought has better information to work with. When the chest tightens, you can say, threat is being signaled. When the breath shortens, urgency is entering. When heat rises, anger is activating. When collapse comes, overwhelm is here. That naming creates space, and in that space, you are no longer only reacting to the emotion. You are listening to what the body is telling you before the story becomes fixed. Part 8 Observation Practice. What am I feeling right now? And how is it shaping what I believe is true? That is the practice. Choose one moment in the day where you notice a reaction forming. It does not have to be dramatic. It might be irritation after a message, defensiveness in a conversation, anxiety before a decision, shame after a mistake, anger at something online, or a sudden feeling of being dismissed, ignored, judged, or misunderstood. Pause before the reaction becomes behavior. Before replying, defending, explaining, withdrawing, posting, correcting, or proving, ask, what am I feeling? Name it simply if you can. Fear, anger, shame, sadness, disappointment, urgency, jealousy, hurt, desire. Or if the word is not clear, name the body state instead. Tight chest, heat, shallow breath, heavy stomach, restlessness, collapse. Then ask, what story is forming from this feeling? Is fear telling you danger is present? Is shame telling you that you are wrong or exposed? Is anger telling you someone is against you? Is sadness telling you nothing will change? Is desire telling you this thing will fix the discomfort? Notice how quickly emotion begins building a narrative. Then ask, would I interpret this differently in another state? If I were rested, grounded, less threatened, less ashamed, less activated, or more connected, would this look the same? That question does not dismiss the emotion. It widens the field around it. For an optional layer, notice emotional shifts across the day and compare how perception changes. What does the world look like when you are calm? What does it look like when you are tired? What feels true when you are angry? What feels possible when you are regulated? The aim is not to stop feeling. The aim is to see how feeling shapes reality before you call it truth. So as we bring episode 9 towards a close, the central point is this. Emotion is not the enemy of intelligence. It is part of the system intelligence that emerges through. Emotion marks meaning, relevance, urgency, threat, longing, shame, value, loss, desire, belonging, and protection. It tells you something has touched the system, something has been activated, something matters. But because emotion arrives quickly, and because it moves through the body before thought has fully organized it, it can also become the frame through which reality is interpreted before you realize a frame has been formed. That is why this episode has not been about obeying every feeling or rejecting feelings altogether. It has been about learning to read emotion more carefully. Because emotion can guide you, but it can also hijack you. It can reveal a boundary, but it can also recruit you into a reaction. It can show you where something matters, but it can also narrow the field, so the first story becomes the only story available. You were never meant to eliminate emotion. You were meant to understand it, and this is where the work becomes practical. When anger appears, you do not need to immediately turn it into an attack. You can ask what boundary, fear, hurt, or injustice it may be signaling. When shame appears, you do not need to collapse into identity. You can ask what part of you feels exposed, judged, or unworthy. When fear appears, you do not need to let it write the whole future. You can ask what risk is present, what memory has been activated, and what evidence is missing. When desire appears, you do not need to obey the pull immediately. You can ask whether it is nourishment, relief, habit, or capture. This is the difference between emotional reaction and emotional literacy. Reaction says, this feeling is true. Literacy says, this feeling is information. Reaction says, act now. Literacy says, read first. Reaction fuses body, story, and behavior. Literacy creates enough space to ask what the emotion is doing before it becomes the action. And many of the patterns we call who I am may actually be emotional responses repeated long enough to become structured. So episode 9 leaves us with this recognition. You do not become clearer by becoming less human. You become clearer by becoming more conscious of what is moving through you. Emotion is not weakness. Emotion is not proof. Emotion is not always the truth. Emotion is a signal. Once you learn to read the signal, you are less likely to be ruled by the story that forms around it. You were never meant to eliminate emotion. You were meant to understand it. The moment you stop treating feelings as the enemy, you stop being controlled by what you haven't yet learned to read of the emotion. To close this episode, I leave you with this. Listen to the feeling beneath the thought, and ask what it is trying to show you before it becomes the story you live from. Thanks for joining me today, and until next time, you've been listening to If the Brain Was an App podcast, the expanded interface, episode 9. Emotion is not the enemy.